Look down at your hand for a moment. Imagine you're holding a single, small coin. It's worn smooth by time, small enough to fit right in the center of your palm. It might not look like much at first glance, just a simple piece of old metal. But what if I told you that this one unassuming object could be the key to unlocking one of the greatest secrets of the ancient world? What if this tiny artifact, lost for centuries, held a story so incredible it challenges everything we thought we knew about the history of an entire continent? This isn't just any coin. This is the Maine penny, and its discovery has ignited a fierce debate that pits established history against a tantalizing, almost unbelievable possibility. Was this little coin, found far from its expected home, carried here by Viking explorers long before Columbus ever set sail? The story begins not in a grand museum or a royal treasury, but in the humble soil of a Native American shell hidden at the Naskeag Point archaeological site in Maine. Picture the scene. It's 1957, and a team of amateur archaeologists and volunteers are carefully sifting through layers of earth, uncovering the everyday remains of a long-vanished settlement. They're finding animal bones, stone tools, and broken pieces of pottery, the typical debris of ancient life. Then, amidst the shells and the soil, one of them spots something different. Something metallic. It was a small, corroded coin. At the time, it was simply catalogued as an interesting, if somewhat puzzling, find. Nobody could have guessed that this unassuming discovery would, decades later, become the centerpiece of a historical firestorm, a single piece of evidence with the potential to redraw the map of early transatlantic contact. This is the heart of our journey today, a deep and fascinating investigation into a mystery that has captivated historians, archaeologists, and adventurers for generations. We're going to examine this coin from every angle. We'll trace its strange and winding path from a Norse mint in Scandinavia to a coastal settlement in North America. We'll meet the skeptics who question its authenticity and the believers who see it as definitive proof. We'll explore the science, the history, and the compelling human stories behind this enigmatic artifact. So get ready to join the investigation, because we are about to dive into the incredible secret of the Maine penny and its startling Viking origins. It was a typical archaeological dig for its time, led not by a university institution but by a passionate group of local enthusiasts. The site was known as the Goddard site, named after the property owners, located on Naskeag Point in the town of Blue Hill, Maine. For centuries, this spot had been a seasonal camping ground for the Penobscot people, a place where generations returned to harvest the bounty of the sea. The layers of earth here were not just soil. They were a built-up archive of daily life, composed predominantly of discarded shells, a massive shell midden that preserved a record of thousands of meals and the tools used to prepare them. The man who would literally uncover the mystery was Guy Mellgren, a dedicated amateur archaeologist and a co-director of the dig. In the late summer of 1957, as his team meticulously sifted through the dark, compacted layers, they were focused on recovering the material culture of Maine's indigenous peoples. Their findings were exactly what you would expect from such a location: an incredible array of stone points, sharp cutting tools, bone awls, and fragments of clay pottery. Every single artifact fit perfectly within the established narrative of the site's Native American history. There was absolutely nothing to suggest any European presence, let alone a Norse one. And then Mellgren's trowel or his screen turned up something that simply did not belong. It was a small, thin, and heavily worn silver coin. In the moment, it was puzzling. It was clearly old, but its design was unfamiliar, and it was found in a context that made no immediate sense. The initial assumption, a logical one, was that it must be a much later British or American coin that had somehow worked its way down into the older layers, perhaps dropped by a farmer in the 1800s. It was carefully bagged, labeled, and catalogued with a simple notation, its true significance completely unrecognized. The profound irony of the situation is almost breathtaking. This single object, with the potential to upend historical timelines, was found completely alone. There were no Norse tools beside it, no remnants of a Viking longship, no other indication of a Scandinavian presence. It was an island of inexplicable evidence in a vast sea of entirely expected Native American artifacts. This context is what makes the coin so endlessly fascinating and so fiercely debated. It wasn't discovered at a potential Viking settlement like Meadows in Newfoundland. It was found deeply embedded within the domestic refuse of a thriving indigenous community, a place where it logically should not have been. This fact forces us to confront a much more complex and intriguing set of possibilities than a simple story of Viking explorers. How did a Norse coin, minted in a world across the ocean, end up lost in a shell heap on the coast of Maine? So what exactly is this small, enigmatic object that sparked such a monumental debate? When you look at the Maine penny, you are looking at a genuine artifact from the Viking Age, a piece of hand-struck currency that is unremarkable in its craftsmanship but extraordinary in its journey. It's a small silver coin, known specifically as a Norse penny. In your hand, it would feel surprisingly light and thin, weighing just over half a gram and measuring a little less than 3/4 of an inch in diameter, roughly the size of a modern American dime but much thinner, almost like a delicate wafer. Its composition is a debased silver, a common practice for coins of that era, meaning it was alloyed with less valuable metals like copper to stretch the mint's supply of precious silver. The surface is dark, pitted, and worn smooth in places, bearing the unmistakable scars of centuries spent buried in an acidic shell midden. The designs stamped into its surface are what firmly root it in 11th century Scandinavia. On one face, you can make out a stylized triquetra, a three-armed interlaced symbol that looks a bit like a three-leafed clover made from elegant, looping curves. This was a common decorative motif in Norse art, often symbolizing concepts of unity or the Holy Trinity as Christianity spread through the Viking world. On the coin's opposite side, you see a cross, but not a simple one. This is a long cross with double arms, a design known specifically from the coinage of King Olaf Kyrre, who ruled Norway from 1067 to 1093. Surrounding these central images, if you look closely, you can see traces of a blundered, almost illegible inscription. The letters are a mix of Latin and runic characters, a common feature on Norse coins from this period, often abbreviating the king's name and his title. The dies used to strike this coin were crudely cut, and the strike was slightly off-center, resulting in an imperfect and somewhat asymmetrical final product. This lack of refinement, ironically, is one of the hallmarks of its authenticity. To understand why this coin is so readily identifiable, we need to place it alongside its known cousins from across the sea. Numismatists, the scientists who study coins, have been able to match the Maine penny almost exactly to a specific type of penny minted in Norway under King Olaf Kyrre, dating it very precisely to between 1065 and 1080. These coins are well documented in Scandinavian hoards, and the design elements, the specific style of the triquetra and the double-armed cross are a perfect match. This isn't a unique, one-of-a-kind design. It's a known variant from a specific time and place. The wear pattern on the main coin is also telling. It shows significant circulation wear, meaning it wasn't lost shortly after being minted. It passed through many hands over a period of decades, perhaps even a century, before its final journey across the Atlantic. This level of detailed typological matching is what convinces most experts that the coin itself is undeniably genuine. It is not a modern forgery. It is a real 11th century Norse penny struck in a Scandinavian mint that somehow found its way to the coast of North America centuries before any documented European contact. For years after its discovery, the coin sat in relative obscurity, its true nature hidden in plain sight. It wasn't until the 1970s, as news of the Norse site at Meadows began to reshape our understanding of the Viking world, that someone took a much closer look at this odd find from Maine. The initial reaction from the academic community was predictably one of profound skepticism. The idea seemed too far-fetched, too convenient. A single Norse coin, found hundreds of miles south of the only confirmed Viking site in North America, embedded in a Native American shell heap. It defied logic. Many archaeologists immediately suspected a hoax or a simple case of accidental contamination. Perhaps it was a souvenir brought back by a modern traveler and dropped at the site, later finding its way into the archaeological layers. Maybe it was a plant, an attempt to create a sensational discovery. The sheer isolation of the find made it incredibly difficult to take at face value. To move past this wall of skepticism, the coin needed to undergo the most rigorous scientific scrutiny possible. It was sent to experts who could answer the fundamental question: is this coin genuinely what it appears to be? This is where the work of numismatists, the forensic scientists of the coin world, became absolutely crucial. The most detailed analysis was conducted by Kolbjørn Skar, a renowned Norwegian numismatist from the University of Oslo. Skar was a leading authority on Viking Age coinage, and his examination was meticulous. He didn't just glance at the coin, he subjected it to a multi-faceted investigation. The first step was a detailed stylistic comparison. He placed the main coin side by side with hundreds of known examples from Scandinavian hoards. What he found was a perfect match to a specific type of penny minted during the reign of King Olaf Kyrre of Norway. The specific design of the double-armed cross, the unique shape of the triquetra, and even the blundered lettering in the inscription were all consistent with coins minted between 1065 and 1080. This wasn't a vague resemblance, it was a precise typological match, like finding the exact same key from a huge set of locks. But scientific authentication goes beyond just comparing pictures. Skar also performed a metallurgical analysis. The composition of the Maine penny was found to be a debased silver, consistent with the practice of the time, containing a specific ratio of silver to copper that aligned with other coins from Olaf Kyrre's reign. Furthermore, the wear pattern on the coin told its own silent story. The surfaces were evenly worn down with no sharp edges, indicating it had been in circulation for a considerable time, likely decades before it was lost. This wasn't a freshly minted coin dropped by an explorer. It was a piece of worn-out currency that had seen extensive use in the Old World. The conclusion from this rigorous analysis was definitive and left little room for doubt. Kolbjørn Skar stated unequivocally that the Maine penny is a genuine Norse silver coin from the 11th century. The coin itself, as an object, is undeniably real and old. It was not a modern forgery. This authentication was the turning point. It transformed the conversation from "is this a fake?" to the far more compelling and complex question: how on earth did it get there? The coin had passed its scientific trial, but the historical mystery had only just begun. So we're left with this undeniable fact: a genuine Norse coin, centuries old, was found at a Native American site in Maine. The coin itself is real, the site is real, but these two realities exist in separate historical worlds, or at least they're supposed to. This is where our mystery transforms from a simple question of authenticity into a profound historical puzzle, a genuine whodunit where the who is a culture and the what is a journey across an ocean. The central, burning question is no longer what the coin is, but how it got there. And to answer that, we need to dive into the two powerful, competing theories that have defined this debate for decades. On one side, we have the thrilling possibility, the Norse contact theory. This is the narrative that captures the imagination. It proposes a direct and simple explanation. Viking explorers themselves carried this coin to the coast of Maine. We know for a fact that the Norse reached North America, establishing a small settlement at Meadows in Newfoundland around the year 1000. This theory suggests their voyages didn't stop there. Proponents argue that these skilled sailors, in their relentless search for timber, resources, or perhaps even new lands to settle, ventured farther south along the Atlantic coastline. During one of these expeditions, a Norseman, a trader, an explorer, a simple crew member could have lost this single penny. Perhaps it fell from a pouch during a trade interaction with local indigenous people. Maybe it was deliberately given as a gift or a token, a curious object exchanged between two very different worlds. In this scenario, the coin's journey ends when a Penobscot individual, finding this strange piece of worked metal, kept it for its novelty or its potential as a raw material for a tool or ornament, eventually discarding it with the rest of their household refuse in the shell midden. This theory paints a picture of a brief, fleeting encounter, a moment of contact that left behind just one incredibly fragile piece of evidence. Standing in direct opposition is the more cautious, skeptical explanation, the modern contamination theory. This argument doesn't question the coin's age, but its path to the archaeological layer. Supporters of this view point out the absolute isolation of the find. At Meadows, archaeologists found an entire settlement, buildings, iron-smithing debris, and a clear Norse cultural layer. At the Goddard site in Maine, they found one coin. Just one, no Norse tools, no ship rivets, no charcoal from Norse-style hearths, no genetic evidence, nothing. The theory of contamination suggests the coin arrived at the site much, much later. One compelling possibility involves the nature of the dig itself. It was conducted by amateur enthusiasts. What if one of the diggers, perhaps a World War II veteran who had traveled in Scandinavia or a coin collector who had acquired Norse pennies, accidentally dropped it? The coin could have fallen from a pocket unnoticed and become mixed with the excavated soil, later being mistakenly recorded as a genuine find. Another possibility is that it was a deliberate plant, a prank, or an attempt to create a sensational discovery, though no evidence has ever emerged to support this. There's also the heirloom hypothesis, the idea that the coin was brought to North America in modern times, maybe in the 1800s by a European settler, and was dropped or lost, eventually working its way down into the older layers through natural processes or later digging. This theory argues that the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. A single anomalous find is far more likely to be the result of a recent accident than proof of a previously unknown historical event. The weight of the controversy, then, rests entirely on this context. If the Norse contact theory is true, it forces a dramatic expansion of our understanding of the Viking reach in the New World, suggesting their influence may have extended hundreds of miles further south than we ever confirmed. It opens up the possibility of more complex and sustained interactions with Native American cultures. If the modern contamination theory is correct, then the Maine penny becomes a fascinating historical red herring, a genuine artifact that tells a false story, a reminder of how easily our view of the past can be skewed by a single, out-of-place object. This is the core of the debate, a classic clash between an extraordinary claim and the strict standards of archaeological proof. One side sees a key that unlocks a door, the other sees a key that was simply lost in the wrong lock. To navigate between these two possibilities, we have to look even closer, not just at the coin, but at the very earth that held it and the complex web of human activity that surrounds its story. Let's begin by fully exploring the first and most exciting theory, that the Maine penny is direct evidence of a Norse presence on the coast of Maine. This argument hinges on the idea that Viking explorers traveled much farther south than the single confirmed site at Meadows in Newfoundland. That settlement, discovered in the 1960s, provides irrefutable proof that the Norse reached North America around the year 1000. But Meadows was likely a gateway, a base camp for expeditions into richer, more promising lands described in their own sagas. The distance from Newfoundland to the coast of Maine is not an unimaginable journey for these master mariners. We're talking about a voyage of roughly 800 miles along a coastline rich with resources. For a people who routinely crossed the open North Atlantic from Norway to Iceland and then to Greenland, sailing south along a visible shore would have been a far less daunting task. This is where the Norse sagas, particularly the saga of the Greenlanders and the saga of Eric the Red, become incredibly important. These are not just myths, they are historical narratives written down a couple of centuries after the events they describe, preserving an oral tradition of exploration. They tell us the Norse didn't just find one place they called Vinland, a land so named for its wild grapes. The sagas describe a whole region of exploration. Leif Eriksson's party is said to have encountered a land of flat stones, a forested territory, and finally this lush, grape-rich country. Later expeditions led by Thorvald Eriksson and Thorfinn Karlsefni explored these coasts further, encountering indigenous peoples they called Skraelings and engaging in both trade and conflict. While we can't pin these saga locations to a modern map with absolute certainty, the descriptions strongly suggest the Norse were exploring the Gulf of St. Lawrence and the Atlantic seaboard, the coast of Maine with its dense forests ideal for shipbuilding and repair, its abundance of wild berries and its rich fishing grounds would have been an incredibly attractive destination for any Norse party pushing south from their base in Newfoundland. The Maine Penny, in this light, could be a tangible piece of evidence that these voyages of discovery did not stop at the northern tip of Newfoundland, but continued down the coastline we now know as New England. Think about the practicalities of such a journey. A Norse Nar, their sturdy ocean-going cargo ship, could have made this trip in a matter of weeks, moving from one promising landmark to the next. They would have been searching for essential resources, especially timber. After centuries of settlement in Greenland, where large trees were scarce, the old-growth forests of Maine would have seemed like a treasure trove. They also sought other valuable goods mentioned in the sagas, like furs, and of course the sources of the grapes that gave Vinland its name. It is entirely plausible that a small group, perhaps a single ship separated from a larger expedition, sailed into Penobscot Bay. There, at a seasonal Native American camp like the Goddard site, a brief, peaceful exchange could have occurred. A Norse trader might have offered a handful of these small silver pennies. To him, they were low-value currency, but to a Native American craftsman, the silver would have been a novel and intriguing material, perfect for hammering into a bead or an ornament. After this single encounter, the Norse may have sailed away, never to return, leaving behind no ruins, no tools, just a single lost coin that found its way into the shell heap, waiting for centuries to tell its story. This theory also helps explain the coin's most puzzling characteristic, its complete isolation. If the Norse had established a permanent settlement, we would expect to find a lot more than one coin. We would find post holes for buildings, distinctive Norse artifacts like bronze cloak pins or soapstone spindle walls, and evidence of their specific style of iron working. But a brief, exploratory trading visit would leave an entirely different archaeological signature. It would be ephemeral, almost invisible. A few items exchanged, a single coin dropped, and then the site returns to its normal use for the next several hundred years. The fact that the Maine penny was found alone without any other European objects actually fits a scenario of a short, limited contact rather than a sustained presence. It's a ghost of a visit, a whisper of a meeting between two worlds that happened once and was then lost to time. The coin, in this interpretation, is not an anomaly but a clue, a solitary piece of a much larger puzzle of Norse exploration in the New World, a puzzle we have only just begun to assemble. To truly appreciate the potential journey of the Maine penny, we must first turn our attention north to the windswept coast of Newfoundland, and the place that transformed Viking history from saga legend into archaeological fact, Meadows. This isn't just another archaeological site. It's a UNESCO World Heritage location, a designation that places it among the most significant cultural and historical places on Earth. Its importance cannot be overstated because Elands Ox Meadows provides the first and only concrete, irrefutable proof that Norse explorers reached the continent of North America roughly 500 years before Christopher Columbus. The discovery of this site in the 1960s by the Norwegian explorers Helge and Anne Stein Ingstad was a monumental event, effectively rewriting the history books and confirming that the Viking sagas were more than just fanciful stories. They were records of genuine human achievement. Let's picture what archaeologists uncovered there. They found the remains of 8 turf-walled structures, buildings that are unmistakably Norse in their design and construction. These weren't temporary shelters, they were substantial halls, a smithy, and workshops capable of housing between 70 and 90 people. The artifacts recovered from these buildings are the kind of everyday items that leave no doubt about their origins. They found a bronze cloak fastening pin, a style that is distinctly Viking. They uncovered a small stone oil lamp, a bone needle for sewing, and pieces of jasper, a stone used for striking sparks to start fires. Most tellingly, they discovered evidence of ironworking. In the smithy, they found slag and a small forge. This is crucial because at the time, the indigenous peoples of that region were not smelting iron. The Norse were processing bog iron, a resource they found locally, to make and repair the nails and tools for their ships. Radiocarbon dating of charcoal from the hearths consistently points to an occupation date of around 1000 AD, perfectly aligning with the saga accounts of Leif Erikson's voyages. Elands Ox Meadows was not a random landing. It was a strategic base camp, a gateway for further exploration into the waters the Norse called Vinland. This established base camp is the essential launching point for the theory that the Maine Penny is a genuine artifact of broader exploration. Think of Elands Ox Meadows not as a final destination, but as a home port for expeditions heading south. The Norse were, above all else, pragmatic explorers and traders, driven by a need for resources that were scarce in their Greenlandic and Icelandic settlements. The sagas describe lands to the south rich with timber, wild grapes, and furs, resources of immense value. From their secure base in Newfoundland, it is entirely logical that they would have sent out smaller parties to scout and map the coastline. A voyage from Elands Ox Meadows down to the coast of Maine is a journey of several hundred miles, but for sailors who had just crossed the treacherous North Atlantic, this would have been a relatively straightforward coastal hop. They would have followed the shoreline, navigating by landmarks, always within sight of land, moving from one bay to the next in their search for valuable cargo. The Maine Penny fits into this model not as an object from a permanent settlement, but as a token from one of these exploratory voyages. The coin itself, as we've established, was not new when it was lost. It was already decades old and heavily worn from circulation. This suggests it was part of a pouch of everyday currency carried by a Norse trader or crew member. During a trading encounter with the indigenous people at the Goddard site, this single coin could have been part of a larger exchange. Perhaps it was given for a bundle of furs or offered as a simple gift of goodwill. To the Norse, it was a low-value piece of metal, but to the Native American recipient, it was a novel curiosity, a piece of worked silver that could be kept for its exotic appeal or eventually hammered into a decorative bead. Its ultimate discard in the shell midden indicates that while it was interesting enough to keep for a while, it wasn't seen as profoundly significant, which is exactly how you would treat a single, strange object obtained in a brief encounter. This scenario elegantly explains the coin's profound isolation. A temporary trading visit would leave no post holes for buildings, no smithing debris, and no other durable Norse artifacts. It would leave only the most fragile and portable of evidence, a single coin lost in the shuffle of daily life, a solitary clue to a meeting that history otherwise forgot. The existence of Elance Ox Meadows proves the Norse had the capability and the desire to be in this part of the world. The Maine Penny raises the tantalizing possibility that their travels took them much, much farther. Of course, the most direct explanation of a Viking coin in Maine is that a Viking dropped it there, but history is rarely so straightforward, and the evidence on the ground forces us to consider a far more intricate and fascinating possibility. What if the Norse never actually set foot in Maine at all? What if this coin traveled the final, crucial leg of its incredible journey not in a Viking longship, but in the hands of Native American traders, passed from village to village along ancient, established trade routes that crisscrossed the continent long before European contact? This is the Native American trade network hypothesis, and for many archaeologists, it represents the most elegant and plausible solution to the Maine Penny mystery. To understand this theory, we first need to completely dismantle any outdated notion of pre-Columbian America as a collection of isolated, primitive tribes. The reality was the exact opposite. North America was woven together by a vast, sophisticated, and incredibly far-reaching web of trade connections. Think of it as a continental internet of exchange, where information, rituals, materials, and finished goods moved constantly across thousands of miles. These weren't just casual, local barter systems. We have overwhelming archaeological evidence for long-distance trade routes that functioned for centuries. From the Great Lakes, copper from Lake Superior was traded all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. From the Rocky Mountains, obsidian, a volcanic glass prized for making razor-sharp tools and ceremonial objects, has been found at sites on the East Coast. Shells from the Atlantic shoreline have been discovered in burial mounds deep in the Ohio River Valley. This was a continent in constant, dynamic conversation, and the Penobscot people of coastal Maine were active and well-connected participants in this system. Now, let's place the confirmed Norse settlement at Elance Ox Meadows into this picture. It was a gateway, a node on the very edge of this vast indigenous network. We know from the Norse sagas themselves that they encountered the people they called Skraelings. These encounters, whether friendly trade or hostile clashes, represent points of contact. It is almost a historical certainty that during these interactions, things were exchanged. The Norse had goods that would have been intensely interesting to the local Beothuk or other groups in the region. Pieces of metal, perhaps a broken tool, a brightly colored piece of woolen cloth, or most likely small, non-functional items like coin. To a Norse trader, a worn-out silver penny was small change, practically worthless. But to a Native American, it was a novel and fascinating object. It was a piece of strangely worked metal, shiny, durable, and utterly unlike anything in their material world. It had no monetary value to them, but it held immense potential value as a raw material or as a curiosity. This is where the trade network takes over. Imagine a Norse coin entering this system at a point like Labrador or Newfoundland. It's acquired by a coastal group, perhaps as a trinket or a token. That same group has long-standing trade relationships with neighbors to the south. During a seasonal gathering or a trading mission, the coin is offered in exchange for something else of value. Perhaps a fine stone knife, a bundle of prized furs, or a string of shell beads known as wampum. The new owner, now further south, might later trade it again to a group from the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and so the coin begins a slow, multi-generational journey, passed from hand to hand, community to community, moving ever southward along the coast. It's not being carried by someone with a destination in mind for the coin itself. It's simply being circulated within a vast economic system, its value based on its exoticism and its material, not its function as currency. This process could have taken decades, even a century or more. By the time this single Norse penny finally reached the hands of a Penobscot individual at the Naskeag Point site, its original point of origin would have been a forgotten story, a legend from a far-off place. It was just another interesting object kept for a time and then, like all other refuse, discarded into the shell midden. This theory powerfully explains the coin's most baffling characteristic, its utter isolation. If a Viking ship had sailed into Penobscot Bay, we would expect to find something else. A second coin, a broken piece of Norse pottery, a lost ship rivet. But if the coin arrived through indigenous trade, its solitude makes perfect sense. It was a single, lightweight, portable object entering a filtering system. It was one exotic item among thousands of others moving through the trade network. We wouldn't expect to find a pile of Lake Superior copper in Maine either. We find individual artifacts because that's how trade works. The system doesn't import bulk goods, it circulates singular, high-value items. The Maine penny, in this light, isn't an anomaly. It is a stunning testament to the efficiency and reach of Native American trade routes, a system so robust it could deliver a piece of 11th century Norway to a coastal shell heap in Maine without a single Viking ever having to sail south of Newfoundland. It transforms the coin from a marker of Norse exploration into a symbol of a vibrant, interconnected Native American world. Yet for all the compelling allure of a Viking ship sailing into Penobscot Bay, we must now turn a critical eye toward this narrative and confront the substantial, and many would say decisive, problems with the direct Norse contact theory. The single greatest obstacle, the one that every archaeologist must grapple with, is the coin's profound and absolute isolation. Let's be perfectly clear about what was found at the Goddard site. Excavators recovered over 30,000 artifacts, 30,000. Among this vast collection, we have stone tools, projectile points, bone needles, pottery shards, and the remains of countless meals. An entire cross-section of daily life for the Penobscot people over generations. And amidst this mountain of indigenous material, there is exactly one object that is unambiguously European, the Maine penny. It is a solitary data point in a sea of contradictory evidence, an island of Norse origin in an entire continent of Native American culture. In archaeology, context is everything, and the context here is screaming that this coin is a profound anomaly, not part of a pattern. Think about what the absence of other evidence really means. If a group of Norse explorers had made landfall, interacted with the local population, and engaged in trade significant enough for a coin to change hands, where is everything else? A Viking party wouldn't have consisted of a single man carrying a single coin. They would have had tools, weapons, clothing, and provisions. They would have repaired their ship, built temporary shelters, cooked meals, and done all the things that leave behind physical traces. So where are the distinctive iron rivets from their longship? Where are the pieces of broken Norse pottery or the bronze cloak pins that are so common at other Norse sites? Where is any evidence of their presence beyond this one tiny, easily lost object? The complete lack of any supporting Norse material culture at the site is a deafening silence that heavily undermines the theory of a direct visit. It suggests that if the Norse were there, their presence was so fleeting, so minimal, that it left no material imprint whatsoever, which begins to stretch the bounds of historical plausibility. This problem expands far beyond the borders of the Naskeek Point site itself. Let's consider the broader region of New England and the Canadian Maritimes. For over a century, archaeologists have been intensively studying this part of the world. They have surveyed thousands of coastal sites, excavated hundreds of them, and compiled an enormous record of indigenous and colonial history. In all that time, with all that digging, not one other confirmed Norse artifact has ever been discovered in a secure archaeological context in the entire northeastern United States. No tools, no jewelry, no remnants of structures. Furthermore, despite advanced scientific techniques, no genetic or archaeological study of pre-Columbian Native American remains in the region has ever revealed evidence of European ancestry or contact that would predate the Spanish and Portuguese explorers of the late 15th century. This is a crucial point. The entire weight of the archaeological record for this region, a record built from countless excavations and analyses, stands in direct opposition to the idea of a Norse presence. The Maine Penny isn't just an outlier, it is a complete contradiction to everything else we know. This leads us to the most plausible alternative explanation, one that respected archaeologists often favor. The coin did not arrive with the Norse, but traveled to Maine through the vast and sophisticated Native American trade networks that long predated European contact. We know these networks were astonishingly extensive. Goods like copper from Lake Superior, obsidian from Wyoming, and shells from the Gulf of Mexico moved across thousands of miles. A Norse coin acquired through trade or other contact in Newfoundland or Labrador could have begun a slow, multi-generational journey southward. It would have been a curiosity, a piece of exotic raw material, passed from hand to hand, community to community, over perhaps a century or more. By the time it reached the Penobscot people in Maine, its original source would have been a distant, forgotten story. This theory elegantly explains the coin's isolation. It arrived not as part of a cultural package, but as a single, intriguing item, just one of many exotic goods circulating in a continent-wide exchange system. It accounts for the coin's presence without requiring us to believe in a Viking expedition that left absolutely no other trace in the archaeological record of New England. This brings us to a crucial point in any historical investigation: the critical importance of separating a compelling story from verifiable fact, and to understand the powerful temptation to believe in a lone, extraordinary artifact. We can look to one of the most famous cautionary tales in the history of archaeology, the Piltdown Man hoax. For decades, the scientific world was utterly convinced it had found the legendary, missing link between apes and humans. In a gravel pit in England in 1912, amateur archaeologist Charles Dawson uncovered what appeared to be the fossilized skull of an ancient human ancestor. It had a human-like brain case but an ape-like jaw, perfectly fitting the expected transitional form. The discovery was hailed as a monumental breakthrough. It was given a scientific name, Eoanthropus dawsoni, or Dawn Man of Dawson. For over 40 years, Piltdown Man was written into textbooks and presented as a key piece of our evolutionary puzzle. It fit the narrative so perfectly that few questioned its authenticity, even as other genuine fossils from Africa and Asia seemed to contradict its story. The scientific community, desperate for a British origin for humanity, had embraced a story that was simply too good to be true. The parallels to the Maine Penny debate are striking, not in the sense that the coin is a deliberate forgery, but in the powerful human tendency to interpret evidence to fit a desired narrative. In both cases, a single, sensational find captured the public and academic imagination. For Piltdown, it was the desire for a British first man. For the Maine Penny, it is the thrilling possibility of Vikings deep in New England. In both cases, the initial discovery seemed to provide a neat, elegant answer to a big historical question. And crucially, in both cases, the artifact was found in isolation, without the supporting evidence that would normally be required for such a revolutionary claim. Piltdown Man stood alone, a bizarre anomaly in the fossil record that didn't connect to anything else. The Maine Penny stands alone, a single European object in a vast collection of indigenous artifacts. The lesson of Piltdown is that when a discovery perfectly fits what we want to be true, it demands the highest level of scrutiny. The eventual unmasking of Piltdown Man is a masterclass in scientific rigor, eventually overcoming preconceived belief. It wasn't until the 1950s that new, more accurate dating methods and microscopic analysis revealed the truth. The skull was a clever, painstaking fraud. The cranium was from a medieval human, the jawbone from an orangutan, and the teeth had been deliberately filed down to disguise their origin. All the pieces had been chemically stained to match the color of the gravel and to appear ancient. The entire thing was a planted fabrication designed to deceive. The fall was humiliating for the field of archaeology. It taught a generation of researchers a painful but vital lesson. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and a preponderance of supporting data is non-negotiable. You cannot hang an entire new chapter of human history on one strangely out-of-place skull. Similarly, we cannot hang a new chapter of Viking exploration on one strangely out-of-place coin, no matter how genuine the coin itself may be. This is the standard that the Maine penny must be held to: the preponderance of evidence. In a court of law, a single piece of circumstantial evidence is not enough to secure a conviction. The prosecution must build an overwhelming case with multiple corroborating lines of proof. The same is true for historical discovery. To prove that Vikings sailed to Maine, we would need to find what archaeologists call a cultural layer, a consistent pattern of evidence. This would include Norse-style structures, their distinctive garbage pits containing animal bones cut with iron tools, lost personal items like brooches or game pieces, and perhaps most importantly, evidence of their unique technologies like the smelting of bog iron. At Elant's Ox Meadows, they found all of this and more. It is a confirmed case because the evidence is abundant and consistent. The Maine penny by itself is a single piece of circumstantial evidence. It points in a fascinating direction, but without a corroborating case, it remains an intriguing possibility rather than definitive proof. The ghost of Piltdown Man reminds us that the integrity of history depends on our ability to resist the allure of the singular, spectacular find and to insist relentlessly on the full weight of evidence. This brings us to the second, and for many experts the more scientifically parsimonious theory, the case for modern contamination. While the idea of Viking traders in Maine captures our imagination, this alternative explanation asks us to consider a much more recent and mundane journey for the coin, one that began not in an 11th century longship but in the pocket of a 20th century man. The central figure in this theory is none other than the discoverer himself, amateur archaeologist Guy Mellgren. To be clear, this is not an accusation of malicious fraud, but rather an exploration of how easily an object can find its way into the wrong century through simple human error. We know that Mellgren was an avid collector of all sorts of curiosities, and significantly, he was known to have a particular interest in old coins. He maintained a personal collection of artifacts, a common practice among enthusiasts of his day. The possibility that he possessed a Norse penny, perhaps acquired through trade with other collectors or found among a lot of unrelated coins, is far from remote. Imagine the scenario: a long day of digging at the Naskeag Point site. Mellgren, deeply absorbed in the work, reaches into his pocket for a handkerchief or a piece of string. Unnoticed by him, a single small coin from his personal collection slips out and falls into the loose soil of the excavation unit, or perhaps it fell from a fold in his paperwork. It's a tiny, silent accident, the kind that could happen to anyone. Later, when the soil from that unit is sifted, the coin is recovered, and with no memory of having dropped it, Mellgren and his team logically assume it must be a genuine find from the archaeological layer. In this version of events, the Maine penny's journey ends not because a Viking lost it, but because an archaeologist, ironically, found it in the wrong place. This possibility is dramatically amplified by the excavation standards of the 1950s, which were fundamentally different from the rigorous, scientific protocols followed by professional archaeologists today. It is crucial to view the Goddard site dig not through a modern lens, but through the context of its time. This was not a university-led expedition with layers of oversight, meticulous screening procedures, and strict chain of custody for artifacts. It was a volunteer effort led by dedicated and well-meaning amateurs, operating with the best knowledge and practices available to them at the moment. Sites were often excavated in arbitrary levels rather than following the subtle, natural stratigraphy of the soil. The screening of excavated dirt might have been done with mesh that was too coarse to catch the smallest artifacts, or sometimes not done consistently at all. There were rarely full-time site monitors whose sole job was to watch for exactly this kind of accidental contamination. The very concept of separating an excavator's personal belongings from the dig site was a less stringent rule. In this more relaxed atmosphere, the potential for a modern object to be introduced to an ancient context was significantly higher. A coin from a collector's pocket falling into an open excavation unit is a plausible accident. In a modern dig, with designated clean areas for personal items and a constant awareness of contamination, such an event would be far less likely to occur and go unrecognized. We must also confront the uncomfortable question of intent. While the accidental loss theory is the most charitable and likely explanation, some have raised the possibility of a deliberate plan. The mid-20th century was a time of intense public fascination with Viking exploration, fueled by new research and popular books. The idea of discovering proof of their presence in the United States would have been incredibly alluring. Could someone, whether Mellgren or another person on site, have deliberately placed the coin to create a sensational discovery? There is absolutely no evidence to support this, and it does a disservice to Mellgren's reputation as a sincere enthusiast. However, from a purely analytical standpoint, the possibility must be acknowledged as part of the full spectrum of explanations. The motivation wouldn't necessarily have been fame or fortune, but perhaps a simple, misguided desire to prove a beloved historical theory, to literally place a key piece of the puzzle into the ground. This is the darker side of the contamination theory, suggesting that the coin is not just evidence of a mistake, but of a potential deception. While less probable than an accident, this shadow adds another layer of complexity to the coin's already convoluted provenance. When you weigh this theory against the Norse contact hypothesis, the scales of archaeological proof begin to tip decisively. The principle of Occam's razor is often invoked in these situations, the idea that the simplest explanation, the one that requires the fewest assumptions, is usually the correct one. So let's compare the assumptions. The Norse contact theory requires us to believe that Viking explorers traveled hundreds of miles south of their only known base, made contact with a specific Native American group at a specific coastal site, engaged in an interaction that resulted in the loss or trade of a single coin, and then left without leaving behind any other physical evidence, no tools, no ship repairs, no cultural impact whatsoever. The modern contamination theory, by contrast, requires only that a man who collected coins accidentally lost one at a dig site where the recording standards were not designed to catch such an error. One explanation involves a complex, unverified historical event that contradicts the broader archaeological record. The other involves a simple, common human mistake that is known to have occurred at other excavations from that era. From a strict evidence-based perspective, the case for contamination is powerfully persuasive. It doesn't make the coin any less real, but it fundamentally changes its story from a relic of transatlantic exploration to a cautionary tale about the delicate art and science of uncovering the past. To truly grasp the significance of the Maine Penny's discovery, we have to venture beyond the coin itself and into the very ground that cradled it for centuries. The Goddard site wasn't just a random patch of dirt. It was a meticulously layered archive, a shell midden built up over generations of seasonal occupation by the Penobscot people. This type of site is more than a trash heap. It's a historical document written in soil, bone, and shell. The stratigraphy, the sequence and composition of these soil layers, is the ultimate witness to the coin's provenance. According to the original excavation records, the coin was reportedly found at a depth of approximately 2 feet, or about 60 centimeters within the midden. This wasn't a shallow, recently disturbed area. It was embedded deep within a dense, compacted layer composed primarily of clam and oyster shells, mixed with charcoal from ancient fires, animal bones, and the stone and bone tools of everyday life. Such a context suggests considerable antiquity. For the coin to have reached that depth through natural processes, it would have had to slowly work its way down through centuries of accumulated refuse, a phenomenon that is possible but highly unlikely in such a compact, stable matrix. The immediate surroundings of the coin were entirely typical of the site. It was found alongside completely indigenous artifacts with no other European materials to keep it company. This deep, seemingly undisturbed context is the strongest evidence proponents of its authenticity can point to, arguing that it must have been deposited while the midden was actively being formed centuries ago. However, the integrity of this context is the very heart of the debate, and it hinges entirely on the quality of the excavation records and the methodologies of the 1950s. While the amateur archaeologists were dedicated, their techniques were not up to modern professional standards. Today, an excavation of such potential importance would be conducted with painstaking precision. Archaeologists would excavate in extremely thin, arbitrary levels, perhaps just 2 or 3 centimeters at a time, carefully mapping the precise three-dimensional location of every single artifact, no matter how small. They would photograph and draw every soil change or stratum, creating a perfect visual record of the site's layered history. The soil would be water-screened through fine mesh to recover the tiniest of ecofacts like fish bones and seeds, which can tell us so much about the environment and diet. The records from the Goddard site, while valuable for their time, simply do not possess this level of granular detail. The excavation units were larger, the levels were thicker, and the exact horizontal and vertical position of the coin relative to every other object around it was not recorded with the precision a modern researcher would require. This lack of ultra-fine resolution leaves a critical door open for doubt. Could a disturbance, invisible to the excavator's eyes, have created a narrow channel for a modern coin to slip down into an older layer? This question of potential disturbance is not just theoretical, it's a very real possibility in a shell midden. These sites are not sterile, sealed time capsules. They are dynamic environments, subject to all sorts of natural and human activity that can churn the layers over long periods. The most obvious agents are burrowing animals. A groundhog, a fox, or even a simple earthworm can create tunnels and pockets that allow newer material to sink and older material to rise, a process known as bioturbation. The acidic nature of a shell midden can also accelerate the decay of organic matter, creating voids that collapse and shift the surrounding soil. Then there is the factor of later human activity. While there was no evidence of a colonial homestead directly on the spot, the area had been used for agriculture and grazing for centuries. The action of a plow, even centuries ago, can slice through an archaeological site, dragging a modern object down or pulling an ancient one up. A farmer digging a post hole, a child digging for bait, or any number of other unrecorded ground disturbances could have created a pathway for contamination that would be virtually impossible to detect with the excavation methods available in the 1950s. Without high-resolution photographs of the soil profile in the exact spot the coin was found, or detailed notes on the specific soil color and texture surrounding it, we cannot definitively rule out these kinds of intrusions. The records tell us it was found deep, but they cannot prove with absolute certainty that the soil column above it was perfectly sealed and undisturbed for the last 800 years. Ultimately, the archaeological context of the Maine Penny is a classic Rorschach test. What you see in it often depends on what you already believe. For those who want to see proof of Vikings in Maine, the recorded depth in a shell midden is compelling, even conclusive evidence. They argue that for the coin to be found in such a dense, compact layer surrounded by pre-Columbian artifacts, it must have been deposited at the same time they were. The chances of a modern coin accidentally working its way down 2 feet through that hard-packed, shell-rich soil are, in their view, vanishingly small. The context, they insist, is strong enough to support the extraordinary claim. For the skeptics, however, the same context is riddled with reasonable doubt. The excavation methods were simply not rigorous enough to eliminate the possibility of a wormhole, an animal burrow, or an unrecorded historical disturbance that provided a shortcut through the centuries. They point out that the very nature of a shell midden makes it susceptible to this kind of mixing over time. The coin's profound isolation, the complete lack of any other Norse material, only amplifies their skepticism, making a single, simple accident during the dig seem like a far more logical explanation than a rewriting of history. So, while the soil of the Goddard site physically holds the answer, the imperfect record of its excavation ensures that the mystery of how the coin got there remains tantalizingly and perhaps permanently unresolved. This brings us to a crucial scientific tool in the archaeologist's toolkit, one that seems like it should provide a definitive answer but instead adds another layer of complexity to our mystery: radiocarbon dating. To understand its role, we need to picture the Goddard site not as a single moment in time, but as a layer cake of history. Each stratum of soil and shell represents a different era of occupation. Radiocarbon dating works by measuring the decay of a radioactive isotope of carbon, carbon-14, which is absorbed by all living things, plants, animals, and humans. When an organism dies, it stops absorbing carbon-14, and the existing amount in its tissues begins to decay at a steady, predictable rate. By measuring how much carbon-14 is left in an organic sample, like a piece of charcoal from an ancient fire or a fragment of a shell from a long-ago meal, scientists can calculate a date range for when that organism died. When archaeologists recovered materials from the same layer that held the Maine penny, they could theoretically use this method to determine the age of that specific stratum. If the charcoal and shells from that level date to, say, the 12th or 13th century, it would strongly suggest that layer was formed during that period. However, and this is the most critical point to grasp, dating the layer is not the same as dating the coin. This is a fundamental distinction in archaeological science. A radiocarbon date tells you when the organic materials in that soil stopped living. It gives you a timestamp for the environment, not for every single object within it. Think of it like this: if you were to bury a time capsule today, you might fill a metal box with items and place it in a hole. 1,000 years from now, an archaeologist could carbon date a twig that was buried with the box. That twig would give a date around our time. But what if 100 years after you buried it, someone else dug down and dropped a modern smartphone into the hole before covering it back up? The soil layer would still produce a carbon date from your time, but the phone would clearly be an intrusion from a much later era. The same principle applies to the Maine penny. Even if every piece of charcoal and shell from its immediate vicinity dates solidly to the pre-Columbian era, it only proves that the layer itself is ancient. It does not and cannot prove that the coin was placed there at the same time. The coin is an inorganic object. It contains no carbon-14 to measure. Its placement in that ancient layer could be synchronous, meaning it was dropped when the layer was formed, or it could be the result of what archaeologists call intrusion, a later object that found its way in. This is where the limitations of the dating method collide with the realities of the site's formation. Shell middens are particularly tricky environments for establishing perfect context. The very process of their creation involves constant human activity, digging pits, discarding refuse, building new hearths over old ones. This can churn the soil, creating what experts call a mixed context. Furthermore, the countless burrows made by small animals over centuries can act like tiny elevators, moving newer material down and older material up, blurring the clean lines between strata. Without an absolutely pristine, sealed layer that has been demonstrated to be completely undisturbed for a millennium, the possibility remains that the coin could have been introduced long after the carbon-dated materials were deposited. The scientific date gives us a frame, but it cannot with certainty tell us when the painting inside the frame was hung. This inherent ambiguity is why archaeologists never rely on a single line of evidence. They build a case on a preponderance of data, on multiple artifact types, clear stratigraphy, and the absence of anomalies. In the case of the Maine Penny, the radiocarbon dates of the site might tell us when the Penobscot people were living there, but they cannot, by themselves, silence the debate over how a Norse coin came to join them. This profound isolation is what truly defines the Maine Penny and forces us to confront the uncomfortable standards of archaeological proof. To appreciate just how much of an outlier this coin is, we need to draw a stark and illuminating comparison with the one place we know for certain the Norse set foot in North America, Elance Ox Meadows. The difference in the volume and quality of evidence between these two sites is not just a matter of degree. It's the difference between a confirmed historical event and a tantalizing, unproven possibility. At Elance Ox Meadows, archaeologists didn't find a single clue and build a theory around it. They uncovered an entire chapter of history written into the very soil. We're talking about the clear foundations of 8 distinct buildings, including large communal halls, a carpentry workshop, and a forge for smelting iron. They recovered a wealth of artifacts that scream Norse presence from every angle: a bronze cloak pin, a stone lamp, a bone knitting needle, and the definitive evidence of iron production, something entirely absent from the indigenous technological repertoire of the region. This was a functioning, year-round base camp that housed dozens of people, leaving behind a rich and unmistakable cultural layer. It is a complete archaeological package where every piece of evidence corroborates and reinforces every other piece, creating a story that is undeniable and robust. Now set that image of a vibrant, evidence-rich settlement against the discovery at the Goddard site in Maine. Here we have one coin, one single, solitary object. It was found not amidst the ruins of a Norse longhouse, but deeply embedded within the domestic refuse of a Native American community. Over 30,000 other artifacts were recovered from that same site, and every single one of them fits perfectly within the established material culture of the Penobscot people. There are no Norse tools, no remnants of their distinctive clothing, no signs of their unique metalworking, and no genetic traces in the human remains. The Maine Penny is an island in a vast sea of contradictory data. It doesn't corroborate anything else at the site, and nothing else at the site corroborates it. This stark contrast is the very essence of the scientific problem. In archaeology, a single find, no matter how genuine or intriguing, is typically classified as an anomaly. It's a data point that exists outside the established pattern, and the default position is to treat it with extreme caution until other evidence emerges to support it. This principle isn't about being closed-minded to new discoveries. It's about maintaining the integrity of the historical record. Imagine you're a detective at a crime scene. You find one fingerprint on a windowsill. It's a compelling lead, but you wouldn't arrest someone based on that alone. You would look for more evidence: footprints, DNA, a motive, an eyewitness, something that connects that fingerprint to a larger story. If, after an exhaustive search of the entire property, that one fingerprint remains the only piece of evidence, you'd start to wonder if it was left there days before by a window washer, completely unrelated to the crime. The Maine Penny is that one fingerprint. It's a fascinating clue, but after more than 60 years of intensive archaeological research across the entire northeastern United States and Canada, no other fingerprints have been found. No corroborating evidence has ever materialized to place the Vikings in Maine. No second coin, no shipwreck, no settlement, no tool. The case for direct Norse contact rests entirely on this one lonely artifact. This 6-decade silence is in many ways the most powerful argument against the coin being proof of a Viking visit. Think about the sheer scale of archaeological activity that has taken place since the 1950s. Coastal development, highway construction, and countless academic surveys have turned over millions of tons of soil. Advanced technologies like ground-penetrating radar and LiDAR have allowed us to scan landscapes for hidden features. If the Norse had a presence in the region significant enough to be trading or losing coins, it is statistically almost inconceivable that we would not have found at least one other trace of them by now. Their material culture was durable and distinct. They built solid structures, they lost metal items, and they left behind a specific kind of garbage. The fact that the Maine penny remains utterly unique after all this time, and all this searching strongly suggests that its presence is not a sign of a hidden pattern waiting to be uncovered, but a true historical fluke. It stands as a monumental testament to the fact that in archaeology, the absence of evidence can, over time and after a thorough search, become evidence of absence. The story of the Maine penny is therefore a masterclass in scientific patience and rigor, reminding us that while a single spark of discovery can ignite our imagination, it takes a sustained fire of corroborating evidence to truly illuminate the past. While the Maine penny stands as the most credible and hotly debated outlier, it is far from the only artifact that has been put forward as proof of a widespread Norse presence in North America. To understand the broader context of this historical quest, we need to journey beyond the Maine coast and consider other famous, yet far more dubious, discoveries that have captured the public's imagination. The landscape of American folklore is dotted with these alleged Viking relics, each with its own compelling story and, ultimately, its own fatal flaws. Examining these cases isn't just about debunking myths. It's about understanding a recurring pattern in how we interpret the past, where hope and national pride can sometimes outweigh the cold, hard evidence. Perhaps the most famous of all these contested objects is the Kensington runestone, a story that begins on a Minnesota farm in 1898. The tale goes that a Swedish immigrant farmer named Olof Oman was clearing land on his property when he unearthed a large, flat stone tangled in the roots of a tree. Carved into its face was an inscription in strange characters. When translated, it told a startling story. It purported to be a message left by a party of Norse and Goth explorers in the year 1362, a full 130 years before Columbus. The inscription described a gruesome event. A group of 10 men were red with blood and dead, having been attacked while fishing, and the rest of the party was away on a journey. This was a sensational claim. It suggested that Norse explorers had not only reached the middle of the continent, traveling all the way from the Atlantic coast to what is now Minnesota, but that they had done so in the 14th century, a time when their Greenland settlements were supposed to be in decline. The stone instantly became a local treasure and a source of immense pride for Scandinavian communities in the Midwest, who saw it as validation of their deep historical roots in the New World. However, when professional linguists and runologist scholars who specialize in ancient runic scripts examined the stone, they immediately raised red flags. The runes used in the inscription were a bizarre mix. Some were from the older 16-character Futhark alphabet used during the Viking Age, while others were from a completely different, later medieval alphabet. This would be like finding a document supposedly written in Shakespearean English that randomly included text messages, abbreviations, and emojis. The stylistic elements simply don't belong to the same time period. Furthermore, the language itself was suspicious. It was filled with modern Swedish and English grammatical constructions and word choices that a 14th century Norseman would never have used. For experts, the evidence was overwhelming. The Kensington runestone was a modern creation, almost certainly carved by Olof Oman or someone in his community, likely as a prank or an attempt to create a heroic origin story. The tree roots supposedly encasing the stone were never convincingly proven, and the entire narrative fell apart under scientific scrutiny. Despite this, the stone remains a popular tourist attraction, a testament to the enduring power of a good story over academic consensus. A similar, though less famous, drama unfolded in Canada with the Beardmore relics. In the 1930s, a prospector named James Edward Dodd claimed to have discovered a cache of Viking weapons, a sword, an axe head, and what was believed to be a piece of a shield boss while digging near Beardmore, Ontario. He asserted he found them resting on a bedrock ledge in a position that suggested they had been carefully placed there, perhaps as a grave offering. The discovery caused a media frenzy, and the Royal Ontario Museum, eager to acquire such a significant collection, purchased the relics. For a time, they were proudly displayed as evidence of Norse penetration deep into the Canadian interior. The allure was powerful. It painted a picture of intrepid Vikings trekking from Hudson Bay down into the Great Lakes region, a journey of epic proportions. The relics themselves seemed authentic at a glance. They were the right types of objects made of iron and heavily corroded, giving them an appearance of great age. Yet, just as with the Kensington runestone, the story began to unravel when inconsistencies emerged. The first major crack appeared when Dodd's own stepson came forward with a different account. He revealed that his father had not discovered the relics in the wilderness at all, but had actually acquired them from another man who had brought them from Norway. According to this version, Dodd had then transported them to the Beardmore site and later discovered them there to create a sensational find. Other witnesses came forward, corroborating the stepson's story and pointing out that the ground where Dodd claimed to have found the relics was entirely unsuitable for preserving iron artifacts for centuries. Faced with this testimony and a lack of any archaeological context, no associated Norse camp, no bones, no other artifacts, the museum's confidence collapsed. By the 1950s, the Beardmore relics were quietly removed from display, their status as a hoax widely accepted by the scholarly community. The case serves as another stark lesson in the importance of provenance, the documented history of an object, and the dangers of accepting spectacular finds without a verifiable and trustworthy chain of custody. What connects the Kensington runestone, the Beardmore relics, and to a certain extent the debate around the Maine Penny, is a powerful psychological and cultural phenomenon. There has long been a deep-seated desire, particularly in the 19th and early 20th centuries, to find a European, and specifically a Nordic, origin for the great monuments and mysteries of pre-Columbian America. This impulse sought to explain away the sophisticated earthworks of the Mississippi Valley or the intricate artifacts of indigenous cultures by attributing them to a lost white race of explorers. While modern scholarship has completely discredited these racist and outdated theories, their echo can still be felt in the passionate defense of artifacts like the Kensington runestone. For immigrant communities, these discoveries offered a powerful sense of belonging and a historical claim to the land that predated other European groups. They were a source of ethnic pride, a way to weave their own story directly into the founding tapestry of the nation. This emotional investment can make it incredibly difficult for scientific evidence to overcome deeply held beliefs, creating a divide between academic history and popular folklore that persists to this day. When we place the Maine Penny alongside these other, largely discredited artifacts, its unique position comes into sharper focus. Unlike the Kensington runestone, whose inscription is linguistically impossible, the Maine Penny is a genuine 11th century artifact. Unlike the Beardmore relics, which were almost certainly planted, the circumstances of the Maine Penny's discovery, while imperfectly recorded, show no clear evidence of malicious intent. The debate surrounding it is not between scholars and true believers, but is a legitimate scientific dispute among archaeologists about interpretation and context. It is this very authenticity that makes the Maine Penny so endlessly fascinating and frustrating. It is a real piece of the Viking world that unequivocally ended up in North America. The central, unresolved question is not what it is, but how it completed its journey. This distinction elevates it from the realm of pure folklore into a genuine, albeit contentious, historical puzzle, one that continues to challenge our understanding of the past and reminds us that sometimes the most compelling mysteries are not solved by finding an answer, but by carefully and patiently weighing all the possibilities. To fully grasp the ambiguity surrounding the Maine Penny, we need to step back and understand the entire field of archaeology as it existed in the 1950s, a world that was fundamentally different from the high-tech, meticulous science it is today. In the mid-20th century, archaeology was undergoing a profound transformation. It was still emerging from its roots as a gentleman's pursuit, a pastime for wealthy collectors and enthusiastic amateurs who are often more focused on acquiring impressive artifacts for private cabinets than on reconstructing the nuanced stories of past human lives. The transition towards a rigorous, systematic discipline was underway, but the methods and standards were far from uniform. Excavations were frequently led by well-intentioned local historical societies or individuals with deep passion but limited formal training. The primary goal was often discovery itself, uncovering objects that could tell a dramatic story, rather than the painstaking process of recording every detail of the context from which those objects came. This was the professional atmosphere in which Guy Mellgren and his team operated. They were not incompetent, they were simply working within the norms of their time, norms that did not yet fully appreciate the concept that the soil surrounding an artifact is as historically valuable as the artifact itself. Consider the typical excavation practices of that era. Sites were often dug in large, arbitrary levels, say, 6-inch increments, rather than by carefully following the subtle, natural layers of soil, known as stratigraphy, that build up over time like the pages of a book. This approach risked mixing artifacts from different centuries together, losing the crucial chronological sequence that tells archaeologists when things happened. The screening of excavated dirt, a process now considered non-negotiable, might have been done inconsistently or with mesh that was too coarse to catch small but telling items like fish bones or seed beads. Personal belongings weren't always strictly separated from the dig site, and the idea of a full-time site supervisor watching solely for potential contamination was not a standard practice. In this environment, the possibility of a modern object, like a coin from a collector's pocket, accidentally finding its way into an excavation unit and being mistakenly recorded as a genuine find was a real and ever-present risk. It wasn't a matter of negligence, it was a simple limitation of the prevailing methodology. The very procedures designed to uncover the past could, in some cases, inadvertently introduce elements from the present. This historical context doesn't discredit Guy Mellgren's discovery, but it does place a crucial asterisk beside it. Mellgren was, by all accounts, a sincere and dedicated amateur archaeologist. He co-directed the dig, maintained the records to the best of his ability, and had a known interest in artifacts, including old coins. Knowing what we do about his personal collection and the informal atmosphere of the dig, the scenario of an accidental introduction becomes not a wild accusation, but a plausible, even likely, explanation that aligns perfectly with the known pitfalls of mid-century archaeology. The coin didn't need to be planted as part of a grand hoax. It could have simply fallen from a pocket during a long, dusty day of digging, settling into the loose soil of the excavation unit without a sound. Later, when it was sifted from the earth, its true origin would have been a mystery even to the finder, who would have logically assumed it was a part of the ancient site. This lost from a pocket theory is the simplest explanation, and it requires no rewriting of history or belief in unverified Viking voyages. It only requires an acknowledgement that human error is a part of every scientific endeavor, especially in its earlier, less refined stages. Contrast this with the protocols of a modern archaeological excavation. Today, the site would be treated like a forensic crime scene. Every shovel of dirt is carefully examined, and excavation proceeds in extremely thin, meticulously measured levels. The precise three-dimensional location of every artifact, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, is recorded with laser-guided tools or high-precision GPS. The soil is often water-screened through fine mesh to recover the tiniest equifax seeds, insect remains, fish scales that can reveal ancient diets and environments. There are strict designated areas for personal items, and the chain of custody for every find is documented from the moment it leaves the ground until it arrives at a laboratory. This hyper-focus on context and contamination control is what allows modern archaeologists to make bold, well-supported claims. If the Maine penny were discovered under these contemporary standards, with its exact position logged among a cluster of carbon-dated 11th century shell fragments and confirmed to be in a completely undisturbed soil layer, the debate would be over. It would be celebrated as definitive proof, but because it was recovered under the more relaxed, informal protocols of the 1950s, that definitive proof remains forever out of reach, leaving us with an enduring mystery built as much on the evolving nature of archaeological science as it is on the silent journey of a single silver coin. So where does this leave us in the eyes of the professional archaeological community? After decades of analysis, debate, and the discovery of no further corroborating evidence, a clear consensus has emerged. The prevailing academic view is that the Maine penny, while a fascinating artifact, is not reliable proof of a Norse presence in Maine. The majority of archaeologists and historians lean heavily towards the modern contamination theory as the most logical and scientifically sound explanation. They do not dispute the coin's authenticity as an 11th century Norse object. That fact is settled. The debate hinges entirely on its provenance, the story of its journey from the mint to the midden. And in that story, the context provided by the Goddard site is seen not as a validation, but as a series of red flags that cannot be ignored. This consensus isn't born from a stubborn refusal to consider exciting possibilities, but from a strict adherence to the established principles of archaeological proof. The foundational rule is that an extraordinary claim requires extraordinary evidence. A claim that Vikings sailed hundreds of miles further south than their only confirmed base, interacting with indigenous groups, would fundamentally reshape our understanding of early transatlantic contact. To support such a revolutionary idea, the evidence must be overwhelming, multiple, and consistent. The Maine penny is none of these things. It is singular, isolated, and anomalous. In the rigorous world of professional archaeology, you cannot hang an entire historical narrative on a single data point, especially one that so flagrantly contradicts the entire body of evidence from the surrounding region. The coin is an intriguing clue, but it is not a smoking gun. Mainstream archaeology points to the principle of Occam's razor. The idea that the simplest explanation, the one requiring the fewest unproven assumptions, is most likely to be true. Let's compare the two theories side by side. The direct Norse contact theory requires us to believe in an unrecorded voyage, a landing at a specific spot, an interaction that left behind only one portable object, and a complete absence of any other physical, genetic, or cultural trace across the entire northeastern seaboard. It's a chain of events built on a sequence of assumptions. The modern contamination theory, by contrast, requires only one simple, documented occurrence. A man who collected coins accidentally lost one at a dig site where the recording standards were not designed to prevent such an error. One explanation asks us to rewrite history based on a profound anomaly. The other explains the anomaly through a common and well-understood pitfall of archaeological fieldwork. For most scholars, the choice is clear. This perspective is powerfully reinforced by the coin's utter solitude within the archaeological record. Think of the vast scale of research that has been conducted since the 1950s. Every highway cut, every housing development, every professional and academic survey along the New England coast has been, in a sense, a test for the Norse contact hypothesis. If Vikings were actively trading and exploring in this region, the chances of finding absolutely no other trace of them, no tools, no ship repairs, no settlements, no second coin, after 70 years of intensive modern archaeology are astronomically small. The continued, deafening silence from the ground is in itself a powerful form of evidence. The absence of proof after a thorough and lengthy search does indeed become evidence of absence. The Maine Penny remains a spectacular outlier, and in science, outliers are treated as intriguing exceptions, not as the foundation for a new historical rule. Ultimately, for mainstream archaeology, the Maine Penny serves a different, yet still profoundly important purpose. It is not a key that unlocks the door to a hidden Viking past in New England, but a masterclass in the complexities and challenges of interpreting the past. It stands as a permanent reminder of the critical importance of context, of rigorous methodology, and of maintaining a healthy skepticism even in the face of alluring discoveries. The coin teaches us that the real story of the past is often not written in single, dramatic artifacts, but in the painstakingly assembled patterns of everyday life, patterns that, at the Goddard site, speak unequivocally of a rich and self-sufficient Native American world. The Maine Penny's greatest legacy may not be the mystery of how it got to Maine, but the lesson it imparts about how we, as curious humans, must carefully separate what we wish were true from what the evidence, in its totality, actually allows us to say with confidence. There's something uniquely powerful about this small piece of silver that transcends its physical form. It isn't just an artifact, it's a vessel for our collective imagination, a blank slate onto which we project some of our deepest cultural longings and historical curiosities. To understand why the Maine Penny continues to fascinate us, we need to look beyond the archaeology and into the realm of human psychology, exploring why this particular story holds such a powerful grip on us, even in the face of significant scientific skepticism. At its core, the allure of the Maine Penny taps into a fundamental human desire to believe that history is more dramatic, more mysterious, and more interconnected than the established records might suggest. We are instinctively drawn to stories that challenge the status quo, that suggest there are lost chapters waiting to be discovered. The idea that Viking explorers, with their iconic longships and formidable reputations, may have ventured further into the New World than we ever proved offers a thrilling alternative to the standard narrative of American history. It introduces an element of epic adventure, of bold navigators daring to go where no European had gone before, long before the era of Columbus. This narrative is inherently cinematic. It's easy to picture a dragon-headed ship emerging from the morning fog off the coast of Maine, its crew gazing upon a forested shoreline that represented an entirely new world. The Maine Penny serves as a tangible, physical token for that breathtaking mental image, a concrete object that allows us to hold a piece of that grand possibility in the palm of our hand. A large part of this fascination is undoubtedly tied to the romanticized image of the Vikings themselves in popular culture. Over the last century, they have been transformed from the brutal raiders of medieval chronicles into complex figures of admiration, intrepid explorers, skilled craftspeople, and democratic pioneers. They represent a spirit of rugged independence and fearless adventure that resonates deeply with modern sensibilities, particularly in North America. This is the age of Leif Erikson Day, of dramatic television series, and of a general cultural celebration of the Norse spirit. In this context, the notion that these celebrated figures reached the very shores of what would become the United States feels like a validation, a way to connect our own national story to a more ancient and heroic European saga. It provides a Nordic origin point that feels distinctly different from the later, more bureaucratic and often brutal colonial enterprises of the Spanish, French, and English. The Viking story is one of individual grit and exploration, not systemic colonization, which makes it a more palatable and exciting foundational myth for many. The Maine Penny, therefore, isn't just evidence, it's a potential relic of a cooler, more adventurous past, a past where the first Europeans to arrive were daring adventurers rather than conquistadors or settlers. This ties directly into a long-standing and often problematic cultural impulse to search for pre-Columbian European presence in the Americas. For centuries, there was a persistent thread of thought, now widely discredited by scholars, that sought to attribute the magnificent accomplishments of indigenous civilizations, from the earthworks of the Mississippi to the temples of Mesoamerica, to a lost race of white builders. This was a way to deny the sophistication and agency of Native American peoples, to insist that such grandeur must have had a European origin. While the modern fascination with the Maine penny is far removed from those explicitly racist theories, it still exists within their historical shadow. It subtly feeds a desire to extend the timeline of European history on this continent, to find a deeper, older connection that predates the 1500s. It's a way of claiming a more ancient stake in the land, a story that can make the European experience in America feel less like a recent arrival and more like a return to a forgotten legacy. The coin symbolizes that potential connection, a whisper from a time when the Norsemen might have walked these forests, making the European presence feel somehow more intrinsic, more destined. Ultimately, the enduring power of the Maine penny mystery lies in its perfect storm of ambiguity. It is a genuinely ancient object, scientifically verified, found in a location that is simultaneously plausible and perplexing. This combination is irresistibly compelling. If it were a clear fake like the Kensington runestone, experts could dismiss it and the public would largely lose interest. If it were found with a host of other Norse artifacts, like at Eland's Ox Meadows, the mystery would be solved and the story would become a settled, if exciting, historical fact. But the Maine penny exists in that tantalizing gray area between possibility and proof. It is a single, silent witness whose testimony can be interpreted in multiple ways. We are left to write the story ourselves, and the story we often choose to write is far more captivating than a simple case of archaeological contamination. We would rather imagine a storm-tossed longship than a coin falling from a distracted archaeologist's pocket. We are, as a species, storytellers at heart, and the Maine penny provides the perfect catalyst for a narrative that is grand, romantic, and challenges the boundaries of what we think we know. It represents the eternal hope that the past still holds magnificent secrets, and that one small silver clue is all it takes to begin unraveling them. Given the incredible advances in scientific technology since the 1950s, it's natural to wonder if we could crack this case wide open if it were discovered today. Imagine a scenario where a team of modern archaeologists equipped with the latest tools arrives at a newly identified shell midden and unearths an artifact like the Maine penny. The investigation that followed would be a forensic-level operation, light years beyond the methods available to Guy Mellgren's team. We could potentially deploy a whole arsenal of new techniques to answer the fundamental question: was this coin deposited in ancient times, or is it a modern intruder? One of the most promising avenues would involve a minute analysis of the coin itself, specifically the microscopic residues and sediments trapped in its pores and corrosion layers. Using advanced techniques like scanning electron microscopy coupled with energy-dispersive X-ray spectroscopy, scientists could identify the exact elemental composition of the soil particles still clinging to the coin. They could then compare this chemical signature to soil samples taken from the precise archaeological layer where it was found. If the residues on the coin perfectly match the unique chemical fingerprint of that specific stratum, including traces of ancient shell fragments, charcoal, and the specific types of pollen present 1,000 years ago, it would provide powerful circumstantial evidence that the coin was indeed buried alongside the other artifacts. Conversely, if the residue profile was different, showing modern contaminants like industrial pollutants or plant pollens that only arrived in the last few centuries, it would strongly point toward a more recent introduction. We could also turn to the science of metallurgy for answers. While we already know the coin is a Norse penny, we might be able to trace its silver back to a specific mine. By analyzing the isotopic ratios of the lead present as a trace element in the silver, a technique known as lead isotope analysis, researchers could potentially match the metal to known Norse silver sources in Europe. This wouldn't tell us how the coin got to Maine, but it could rule out other possibilities. If the lead signature pointed to a mine that was only operational for a brief period in the 11th century, it would further cement the coin's authenticity and narrow its window of origin. More importantly, we could analyze the coin's surface for any trace elements that might hint at its journey. For instance, if we discovered microscopic residues of a plant species native only to the Canadian Maritimes or a specific type of North American tree resin, it would be a bombshell finding, suggesting the coin spent significant time in a New World environment before being lost. Perhaps the most definitive approach would be to return to the source and conduct a new, meticulously controlled excavation of the Goddard site itself. Modern archaeology is a discipline of millimeters and milliseconds. Today, the site would be laid out with a laser grid, and every scoop of soil would be removed in ultra-thin, 2-centimeter levels. Every artifact, no matter how small, would have its precise 3-dimensional location recorded with a total station theodolite, creating a perfect digital map of the site. The excavated soil would be meticulously water-screened through fine mesh to recover the tiniest of Equifax fish scales, seeds, insect remains that can reveal the ancient environment. Crucially, modern protocols would eliminate the risk of contamination. Personal items would be banned from the excavation area, and the chain of custody for every find would be absolute. If a Norse coin were discovered under these conditions, firmly seated in a layer of soil that was demonstrably undisturbed and sealed by later deposits, and if that layer was bracketed by multiple radiocarbon dates from associated shell and charcoal, all pointing to the 11th or 12th centuries, the argument for a modern accident would collapse. The context would be airtight, yet even with all this sophisticated technology, the ghost of past excavations would still haunt the investigation. The original Goddard site was extensively dug in the 1950s, and that context is now irrevocably lost. The specific soil column that held the Maine penny has been dismantled. We can't go back and sample the earth that was directly in contact with it. We are left analyzing an object that has been handled, stored, and removed from its original setting. This is the great tragedy of the Maine penny. It was a question mark discovered before we had the tools to answer it with certainty. While modern science could provide a preponderance of evidence pointing in one direction, the absolute case-closed proof we crave might remain perpetually out of reach. The coin is a permanent resident of that fascinating gray area between history and mystery, a reminder that some secrets, no matter how small, are buried just deep enough to keep us wondering forever. Today, if you want to stand in the presence of this enigmatic artifact, you have to travel to Augusta, Maine, and step inside the quiet, hallowed halls of the Maine State Museum. This is where the coin has found its permanent home, not in a grand national institution, but in the state repository that serves as the ultimate custodian of its story. As you approach its display, the presentation is immediately telling. The Maine penny isn't showcased with the fanfare of a crown jewel or the definitive certainty of a proven historical treasure. Instead, it is presented with a profound and respectful sense of mystery. The exhibit language is carefully, almost painstakingly, worded to reflect the ongoing debate. You will not find a label that boldly states proof of Vikings in Maine. Instead, the descriptions are more likely to use phrases like puzzling artifact, hotly debated, and unanswered questions. The museum takes on the vital role of an honest broker, presenting the evidence for both the Norse contact theory and the modern contamination theory with a remarkable sense of balance. It invites visitors not to accept a pre-packaged conclusion, but to become active participants in the mystery, to look at this small silver disc and weigh the possibilities for themselves. This nuanced presentation is a masterclass in modern museology, acknowledging that some historical puzzles don't have neat solutions and that the journey of inquiry is often as valuable as a final answer. The physical presence of the coin in its case is surprisingly humble. It isn't large or flashy. You'll likely find it nestled securely in a climate-controlled display, perhaps accompanied by a magnifying lens that allows you to lean in and examine the worn triquetra and the faint cross. Seeing it in person, you're struck by its smallness, its tangible reality. This isn't an abstract concept in a history book. It's a physical object you can view with your own eyes, a thing that was held in the hands of an 11th century Norseman, and then, somehow, centuries later, in the hands of a Penobscot individual on the coast of Maine. The museum often contextualizes it beautifully, placing it not in isolation but within the broader narrative of Maine's deep history. You might see it displayed alongside the stunning stone tools and beautiful pottery recovered from the Goddard site itself, a powerful visual reminder that this single European object was discovered within a vast collection of indigenous material. This curatorial choice reinforces the central paradox. The coin is physically surrounded by the evidence of a thriving Native American culture, yet its origin points across the ocean, creating a silent, potent dialogue between two worlds within a single display case. Its status within the museum is unique. It is undeniably a state treasure, one of the most famous and controversial artifacts in the entire collection. Yet it's a treasure whose very meaning is contested. It holds a place of honor not because it confirms a glorious past, but because it represents an enduring enigma. For the people of Maine, the coin is a point of immense local pride and fascination. It connects their state to a global narrative of exploration and mystery, putting a small New England town on the map of one of history's greatest detective stories. School children on field trips press their noses to the glass, learning about the Vikings and the complexities of archaeology through this one captivating object. It serves as a perfect gateway, sparking curiosity about the past and teaching a valuable lesson about how history is not always a settled fact, but a living, breathing subject of inquiry and debate. The museum, in its stewardship, protects both the coin and its mystery, ensuring that it remains a focal point for education and wonder for generations to come. Ultimately, the Maine Penny's presentation at the Maine State Museum is a mirror reflecting the very essence of the historical debate. It is not displayed as a closed case, but as an open question. The labeled text is a conversation, not a declaration. This approach honors the complexity of the artifact and the integrity of the scientific process. By refusing to force a conclusion, the museum acknowledges the legitimate arguments on all sides and respects the intelligence of its visitors. It allows the coin to be exactly what it is, a genuine, ancient, and profoundly mysterious object whose true story may never be fully known. In doing so, the museum doesn't diminish the coin's importance, it elevates it. It becomes more than just a relic. It is a symbol of the endless human quest for knowledge, a permanent invitation to look at a piece of the past and dare to ask, how did you get here? But beyond the quiet halls of the museum and the rigorous debates of academic journals, the Maine Penny has taken on a vibrant life of its own in the realm of popular culture, transforming from a mere archaeological find into a potent cultural icon. Its journey into the public consciousness began in earnest with a seminal 1979 article in National Geographic, which brought the tantalizing mystery to millions of breakfast tables around the world. That article, with its evocative images and compelling prose, framed the coin not as a dry academic puzzle, but as a real-life adventure story, a cliffhanger from the deep past. This was the spark that ignited a media firestorm. Suddenly, the Maine Penny was no longer just an obscure entry in a site catalogue. It was a key that could potentially unlock a hidden chapter of history, and everyone from documentary filmmakers to best-selling authors wanted a turn. Television programs dedicated to ancient mysteries and unexplained phenomena seized upon the story, often presenting it with dramatic reenactments of Viking longships crashing through Atlantic waves toward the pine-studded coast of Maine. These productions, while sometimes light on archaeological nuance, were incredibly effective at embedding the coin's image and its central question into the popular imagination, making "Could the Vikings have been here?" a question debated in living rooms and classrooms alike. The literary world enthusiastically embraced the coin's narrative potential. It features prominently in numerous books exploring the enigmas of pre-Columbian transatlantic contact, often serving as the central piece of evidence in arguments for a wider Norse exploration of North America. In these texts, the penny is frequently presented not as an outlier, but as a crucial data point in a larger, hidden pattern. For authors like the late Farley Mowat in his book, The Farfarers, the coin was a supporting actor in a much grander saga, used to argue for even earlier European exploration. These books, while varying in their scholarly rigor, have played an essential role in keeping the mystery alive and accessible, translating complex archaeological arguments into gripping narratives for a general audience. The digital age has only amplified this phenomenon. Today, the Maine penny is a star subject in countless online articles, YouTube videos, and dedicated forum threads on history and alternative history websites. These digital spaces have become modern-day campfires where amateurs and experts, skeptics and believers gather to dissect every facet of the story. Enthusiasts upload high-resolution images of the coin, pore over old excavation reports, and debate the merits of the trade network theory versus the direct contact hypothesis with a passion that rivals any academic conference. This collective, crowdsourced investigation has created a vast and enduring repository of public interest, ensuring that the Maine penny never fades into obscurity. This widespread cultural footprint, however, means the coin is not just a passive object of study. It has become a tool wielded by different groups to support vastly different agendas. For mainstream historians and archaeologists, it serves as a perfect case study in scientific methodology, a lesson in the critical importance of context, the dangers of rushing to judgment, and the rigorous standards required to prove an extraordinary claim. In university classrooms, it's used to teach students how to weigh evidence, question provenance, and understand the difference between a tantalizing possibility and a proven fact. For these professionals, the coin's greatest value lies not in answering a question, but in demonstrating how to ask questions properly. On the other end of the spectrum, the Maine penny has been eagerly adopted by proponents of pseudo-archaeology and various alternative history theories. For them, the coin is a smoking gun that a hidebound academic establishment refuses to accept. It is held up as definitive proof of their broader, often more sensationalist narratives, that Viking settlement in the Americas was widespread, that history is actively being suppressed, and that a single artifact can overturn everything we thought we knew. In these circles, the coin's isolation is not a weakness but a strength. It's seen as a brave survivor of a systematic cover-up, a lone piece of truth that slipped through the cracks. Perhaps most powerfully, the Maine penny has been embraced as a powerful symbol of heritage and identity. For many people of Scandinavian descent in North America, particularly in the Midwest and New England, the coin is a source of immense cultural pride. It provides a tangible, physical connection to a romanticized Viking past, validating the deep historical roots of their community in the New World. It's not just an old coin. It's a relic of their ancestors' purported courage and exploratory spirit, a symbol that they were here first. This emotional connection transcends academic debate, rooted in a deep-seated human desire for a meaningful and heroic origin story. The coin features in community festivals, heritage society publications, and local museum exhibits, serving as a focal point for celebrating Nordic culture and its perceived role in American history. This multifaceted cultural life demonstrates the coin's true power. It has escaped the confines of archaeology to become a mirror reflecting our own desires, our biases, and our endless fascination with the unknown. It is a Rorschach test in silver, and what people see in it, definitive proof, a cautionary tale, or a symbol of heritage, tells us as much about ourselves as it does about the distant past. Imagine sitting down with a field archaeologist who has spent decades with their hands in the soil, carefully peeling back the layers of time. This is a professional who lives by a simple, unyielding rule: context is everything. If we were to ask such a skeptic about the Maine Penny, their response wouldn't be dismissive. It would be a masterclass in the disciplined interpretation of evidence. They would likely lean forward and say, "Let's start with the most fundamental principle in our field. An artifact is not just an object, it's part of a conversation with the soil around it." And at the Goddard site, that conversation is overwhelmingly, unequivocally one of indigenous life. We recovered over 30,000 artifacts from that midden. Stone tools, pottery shards, animal bones, every single item, except for that one coin, fits perfectly within the known material culture of the Penobscot people. Finding a Norse penny there isn't like finding a needle in a haystack. It's like finding a single, perfect grain of sand from a beach across the ocean, deposited in a vast desert. The context doesn't just raise questions, it shouts that this object is an anomaly. They would then guide us through the logical framework that guides all scientific inquiry, a principle known as Occam's razor. This isn't about choosing the boring explanation, they would clarify. It's about choosing the explanation that requires the fewest unsupported assumptions. So let's lay out the two competing stories side by side. The direct Norse contact theory requires us to believe a whole sequence of complex, unproven events. It asks us to accept that Vikings sailed hundreds of miles south of their only confirmed base at Meadows, that they made contact at this specific spot in Maine, that they engaged in an interaction significant enough for a coin to change hands, and that they then vanished without leaving a single other trace. No lost tools, no ship repairs, no evidence of their presence in the entire archaeological record of New England. That's a chain of events built entirely on inference. Now, consider the modern contamination theory. This only requires one simple, documented occurrence. A well-meaning amateur archaeologist who we know collected coins accidentally dropped one from his pocket during an excavation in the 1950s, when standards for preventing such accidents were not what they are today. One story is a sprawling historical epic with no supporting cast. The other is a simple human mistake. Occam's razor compels us to choose the latter. The conversation would inevitably turn to the man who found the coin, Guy Mellgren. Our skeptical archaeologist would approach this with empathy, not accusation. We have to view Mellgren's work through the lens of his time. He was a dedicated enthusiast operating with the best practices of the 1950s. Those practices were simply not designed to catch this kind of error. There were no stringent rules about personal belongings at the dig site, no full-time monitors watching for contamination. It was a different era. Knowing that Mellgren had a personal coin collection, the scenario of an accidental loss isn't a conspiracy. It's the most straightforward explanation that fits all the known facts. It doesn't mean he was fraudulent. It just means he was human, working in a time when the science was still developing its rigorous defenses against these very kinds of inadvertent errors. Finally, they would bring the point home with a powerful analogy. Think of it like a courtroom, they might say. The Maine Penny is a single piece of circumstantial evidence. It's intriguing, it's genuine, but by itself, it cannot convict history of a completely new narrative. To prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Vikings were in Maine, we would need a preponderance of evidence. We would need the equivalent of multiple witnesses, forensic data, and a clear motive. We would need what we found at Meadows: Norse buildings, Norse tools, Norse garbage. In Maine, we have none of that. We have one silent, solitary object. My job as an archaeologist isn't to shut down exciting possibilities. It's to insist that the story we tell about the past is built on the most solid, reproducible, and contextually sound foundation possible. And right now, the foundation for the Maine Penny being proof of direct Viking contact is unfortunately built on sand. Now let's shift our perspective entirely and step into the world of those who look at this same collection of facts and see not a cautionary tale but a compelling case for contact. Imagine sitting down with a historian who specializes in Norse exploration. This isn't a fringe theorist, but a serious scholar who argues that the dismissal of the Maine Penny is premature and that we need to rethink our definition of what constitutes proof. They might begin by challenging the very foundation of the skeptic's argument. The biggest mistake we make, they would say, is applying a 20th century land-based archaeological mindset to an 11th century sea-based culture. The Norse were not colonists in the sense that we understand from later periods. They were explorers, traders, and opportunists. They didn't necessarily build permanent settlements everywhere they went. A more accurate model for their presence in North America is not a spreading stain on a map, but a series of temporary camps, of seasonal landings, of brief encounters up and down a coastline they called Vinland for its resources. This historian would then direct our attention to the incredible dynamism of the indigenous world. To say a single coin is insufficient evidence is to profoundly misunderstand how things moved in pre-Columbian America, they'd argue. We have overwhelming proof of trade networks that span the continent, moving objects across thousands of miles. Copper from Lake Superior has been found in Florida. Shells from the Gulf of Mexico have been found in Canada. The idea that a Norse object acquired in a meeting in Newfoundland or Labrador could not have traveled south to Maine through these existing, highly efficient channels is actually the less plausible scenario. The Penobscot people were not isolated. They were a hub in a vast coastal exchange system. A curious object like a silver coin would have been a perfect trade item, exotic, durable, and easily portable. Its journey from a Norse hand to that shell midden might have taken years, even generations, passing through a dozen different communities. Its isolation isn't a mark against its authenticity. It's a classic signature of long-distance trade. You don't find bulk imports in these networks. You find singular, special objects. They would tackle the absence of evidence argument head-on. The claim that we haven't found anything else is a logical fallacy, the historian would state firmly. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. It is a statement about the current state of our knowledge, not a definitive statement about history. Consider the geography. The coast of Maine has over 3,000 miles of shoreline, much of it dramatically changed by sea level rise and erosion over the last millennium. The vast majority of potential Norse landing sites are now underwater, buried under centuries of sediment, or simply haven't been looked at with the specific goal of finding ephemeral Norse presence. We found Elance Orks Meadows largely by accident following a hunch from the Sagas. How many other smaller sites are out there, waiting for a storm to expose them or for the right archaeologist to look in the right place? To conclude that Vikings never came here because we haven't found a second artifact yet is like concluding a whale doesn't exist because you've only ever seen it spout once. Finally, they would reframe the entire debate around the nature of the artifact itself. Look at the coin not as a solitary anomaly, but as a data point that fits a broader, emerging pattern, they'd suggest. We know the Norse were at Elance Orks Meadows. We know from the Sagas they explored further south. We know from biogeographical studies that the resources they described, like wild grapes, did exist in the Gulf of St. Lawrence and further down the coast. The Maine Penny is a piece of physical, tangible evidence that aligns perfectly with this narrative. It's not that we have one coin and a bunch of maybes. We have a confirmed base, written accounts of further exploration, ecological corroboration, and a coin. The coin is the keystone that makes the entire arch of the story hold together. To dismiss it as contamination is to ignore the elegant way it fits into the larger puzzle. It asks us to be bolder in our interpretations, to accept that the history of this continent is more complex and interconnected than we've traditionally allowed, and to acknowledge that sometimes the most profound truths are whispered by a single, silent witness. After this deep and winding investigation through history, science, and human nature, we find ourselves at a crossroads, tasked with weighing all the evidence to reach a balanced verdict on the Maine Penny. On one side of the scale, we place the compelling arguments of mainstream archaeology, a discipline built on the bedrock of context, reproducibility, and Occam's razor. This viewpoint presents a powerful and logically consistent case. The coin's profound isolation is its greatest vulnerability. In a site yielding over 30,000 indigenous artifacts, the presence of a single, solitary European object is an anomaly of staggering proportions. Modern archaeology, with its forensic-level standards, demands multiple corroborating lines of evidence to support a claim as revolutionary as a Norse presence in Maine. A single data point, no matter how intriguing, is simply not enough to bear that immense weight. When we combine this with the very real possibility of modern contamination, a simple human accident by a well-meaning coin collector during an excavation that lacked today's rigorous protocols, the path of least resistance becomes clear. The simplest explanation, that the coin fell from a 20th century pocket, requires far fewer unproven assumptions than a complex narrative of unrecorded voyages and ephemeral contact. This is not a boring or closed-minded conclusion. It is the disciplined application of scientific principle, ensuring the stories we tell about the past are built on the most solid foundation possible. Yet, when we look to the other side of the scale, we see that the case for the penny's authenticity as a pre-Columbian object is not without its own intellectual merits. This perspective asks us to think differently about the Norse, not as colonists who left permanent marks, but as transient explorers and traders who moved lightly along coastlines. It challenges us to fully appreciate the breathtaking scale and efficiency of Native American trade networks, which we know for a fact moved exotic materials across thousands of miles. In this light, the coin's isolation is transformed from a weakness into a signature. It is precisely the kind of singular, portable curiosity that would circulate in such a system, passed from hand to hand over generations until its original story was forgotten. Proponents of this view also rightly point out that the absence of other evidence is not definitive proof of absence. The northeastern coastline is vast, much of it now submerged or eroded, and we have only begun to scratch the surface of its archaeological potential. To dismiss the penny outright is to potentially ignore a key that fits a larger, emerging pattern that includes the confirmed base at Elance Orks Meadows, the saga accounts of southern exploration, and the ecological evidence for resources like grapes further south. So, where does this leave us if we must render a verdict based on the preponderance of evidence as defined by contemporary scientific practice? The scales tip decisively toward the modern contamination theory. The overwhelming silence of the archaeological record in New England, after decades of intensive research, is a powerful testimony. The logical elegance of the accidental loss scenario, combined with the acknowledged limitations of 1950s excavation methods, presents a far more parsimonious explanation. The professional consensus is not a conspiracy to suppress a thrilling truth, but a collective commitment to the highest standards of proof. However, and this is a crucial however, this verdict does not completely slam the door on the mystery. The faint, tantalizing possibility that this coin is genuine evidence of trade, that it did indeed travel across the ocean and then down the coast through indigenous hands, is what gives the Maine penny its enduring power. This possibility is the ghost in the machine of history, the what if that keeps the story alive, It means that while we cannot, in good scientific conscience, point to the penny as proof of Vikings in Maine, we also cannot, with 100% certainty, declare that they were never there. The coin remains a permanent question mark, a symbol of the limits of our knowledge and the thrilling potential that the past still holds secrets waiting for the right storm, the right technology, or the right trowel to uncover them. Its greatest legacy is not in providing an answer, but in forever fueling our curiosity about the intricate and hidden connections that weave through human history. And so, after this incredible journey through time, science, and speculation, we are left with the Maine penny itself, a small, silent, and stubborn enigma. Its story is one of the most captivating in American archaeology, a tale that begins with a genuine artifact and spirals into a profound mystery. We've traced its origins to a Norse mint under King Olaf Kyrre in the 11th century, confirmed its authenticity beyond any reasonable doubt, and then followed its bewildering path to a Native American shell heap on the coast of Maine. We've weighed the thrilling possibility of Viking explorers venturing farther south than we ever confirmed against the more cautious explanation of a simple, modern accident during a dig. We've considered the elegant theory of ancient indigenous trade networks, capable of moving a single curious object across a continent over generations. And through it all, the coin remains resolutely silent, refusing to give up its final secret. This isn't a mystery with a clean resolution. It is a historical debate that remains vibrantly alive, a puzzle where the pieces fit in more than one way depending on how you choose to look at them. The Maine penny teaches us that the past is not always a settled fact, but is often a dynamic conversation between what we find, how we interpret it, and what we are willing to believe. It stands as a powerful reminder that a single object can hold multiple truths within it, each one a doorway to a different version of history. Whether you see it as a ghost of a Viking voyage, a testament to native trade, or a cautionary tale from the early days of archaeology, its power to captivate is undeniable. This tiny piece of silver has challenged textbooks, ignited imaginations, and forced us to confront the uncomfortable reality that some of history's greatest questions may never have a single, definitive answer. And perhaps that is exactly as it should be. The enduring allure of mysteries like the Maine penny is what drives the entire field of historical inquiry forward. It pushes archaeologists to dig deeper, to develop new technologies, and to ask better questions. It reminds us that the map of the past is still being drawn, with blank spaces that invite exploration and discovery. These puzzles connect us to the human stories that came before us, stories of exploration, encounter, and the simple, accidental journeys of everyday objects. They challenge us to be humble in the face of what we don't know and to remain endlessly curious about the world. So, what do you think after hearing the evidence? Does your mind lean toward the epic saga of a lost Viking ship, the intricate web of native commerce, or the simple human error of a 20th century collector? The investigation is now in your hands. We would love to hear your verdict. Share your own theories and thoughts in the comments below. Let's continue this fascinating conversation.